The way I tell it now, years later, people expect a shouting match. They expect me crying at the table, or storming out, or saying something cutting that I'd rehearsed. None of that happened. What happened was quieter, and I think worse. My father slid the papers across the table, the way you'd push a plate towards someone who hadn't asked for food. Sign and stop acting entitled. My mother didn't even look up from her coffee when she said I didn't own anything here. I remember thinking, distantly, that I should feel something enormous in that moment, grief or rage, or the specific humiliation of being erased in your own kitchen. Instead, I felt very still. I signed nothing, I didn't argue. I said I need to think about it, folded the papers without reading them fully, and drove home. If you'd asked me that night what I was planning, I couldn't have told you. There was no plan. There was only a small, stubborn refusal to accept the story I was being handed, the way you might refuse a meal that smells wrong before you can articulate why. There's a memory I didn't think about for years, until all of this forced it back up. I was maybe 11, walking the north fence line with my grandfather while he checked posts for rot. He wasn't a sentimental man. He talked about drainage and hay prices, and the neighbor's fence that leaned 2 degrees off true. But at one point, apropos of nothing, he said something like, "This land's going to outlast all of us, so it matters whose hands it ends up in." I didn't ask what he meant. 11-year-olds don't interrogate throwaway lines from their grandfathers. I filed it away without knowing I was filing it, the way children do with things adults say and forget they've said. I thought about that sentence a lot, later. I still don't know if he meant it as a promise, or just a stray thought about erosion. What I did next wasn't clever. I want to be honest about that, because in the retelling it sometimes gets flattened into a strategy. Like I walked into the county clerk's office with a plan to expose something. I didn't. I went because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. Signing felt wrong and arguing felt useless. So I drove to the courthouse and asked for the deed history on the property because it was the only concrete thing I could think to ask for. Public record. Nothing dramatic. A woman I'd never met pulled the file because that was her job, not because the story needed her to. She found the transfer first. Clean, recent, my parents' names on it, everything in order on its face. I remember feeling almost foolish, like I'd come here for nothing. Then she kept going, because the file was thicker than the transfer alone, and there was an older packet underneath, scanned and slightly crooked on the page, labeled simply, Will. I watched her face change before she said anything. That's the part I remember most clearly. Not her words, but the half-second of stillness before them. She leaned in and told me quietly, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to say it out loud, that this document had never been filed, and that it changed things. I won't pretend I understood the legal weight of it right away. I understood the feeling before I understood the fact. Something had been kept from me on purpose, by people who called it entitlement when I asked questions. The months after that don't compress well into a story, so I won't force them to. There were probate attorneys who spoke slowly and carefully, the way people do when they're used to delivering complicated news to exhausted people. There were hearing dates that got pushed twice. There were voicemails from my parents that shifted in tone as the process moved forward. Contempt at first, the same voice from the kitchen table, and then something more careful, almost pleading, once their attorney explained what a court might actually decide. I didn't return most of those calls, not out of cruelty. I genuinely didn't know what I'd say. The turning point, when it came, wasn't cinematic. There was no scene of my parents being confronted in a room, no moment of them realizing I'd won. It was a formal notice mailed to the farm's address, the kind of document that looks unremarkable in an envelope but rearranges a family's entire understanding of itself. A judge, working from documents and dates rather than anyone's feelings, determined that the original will, naming me, not my parents, as primary heir to the land, should have governed the estate, and that the transfer built on top of its absence didn't hold. It was procedural. It was also, unmistakably, the moment control shifted. I didn't feel triumphant reading it. I felt something closer to nausea, the same nausea I'd felt standing in the clerk's office months earlier. It is a strange thing to be handed proof that you were right, and to feel worse instead of better. I own the farm now, on paper. I haven't moved back. I haven't sold it either, though real estate agents still call sometimes, the same ones my parents were probably going to sell to. My father and I haven't spoken since the ruling. My mother sends a card at Christmas that says nothing about any of this, as if the silence between the lines is its own kind of message. I don't know what to do with 300 acres and a family that no longer knows how to talk to me. I'm not sure own is even the right word for what I have. Sometimes as I drive out there anyway, on weekends, and walk the north fence line the way my grandfather used to. The posts are leaning again. Nobody's checked them in a while. I stand there and think about that offhand sentence he said when I was 11. about the land outlasting all of us, about whose hands it ends up in, and I still don't know if I've fulfilled it or just outlived the argument. I don't tell people this story expecting them to feel satisfied at the end. I'm not sure it has that kind of ending. I got the truth. I got the land. I didn't get my family, and I've stopped waiting to see if that's a fair trade.